So thanks for tuning in to part 2 of Marni Richelle, Marni McConaughey's explanation of what it's like to be an Enneagram 3. So thanks again, Marni, for agreeing to sit down with us and to tell us what it's like to be you. I've got a few more questions for Marni that I want to ask her, and this is actually one that, as I was putting together the questions, formulating how this conversation was going to kind of go, this one I thought, oh, do I send this one to her? Like, it felt really conflicting to me, which actually told me a lot about myself, that I kind of get a trigger with this. But when she messaged me back, she's like, no, nothing's off limits. You can ask me anything. So I'm curious to know, and maybe we can kind of like, as two friends, kind of talk about this a little bit, because I think this is a big one. What's your experience of failure?
When I think about failure, a lot of fear rises up. Mm-hmm. And I'm not usually like a fearful person, but failure for sure feels like kind of like the worst. And it's failure of like not being enough, failure of letting people down, and failure of not having a legacy of some sort.
That's a big word.
Yeah.
I love that word, legacy.
Yeah. And like, we touched on my dad the last section, but a big thing I'm realizing too is my dad was a 3.
You think so?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And
was he more the prestigious social 3?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody knew him.
Everyone knew him, and you know, like everyone was devastated, and there was a big loss for a lot of people.
There was a whole community.
Yeah, and so that made me realize just like how incredible he was. Mm-hmm. And he made a mark. Mm-hmm. And I think like one of the biggest fears in general in everyone's world is the fear of death, right? Because then it's done, right? Yeah. And so failure feels like a little bit of like a little death. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the hallmark features of the Enneagram 3 is they have a fear of failure. So it's partly why 3s work so hard. It's why they will stop at nothing to achieve, because there's that undertone or that under the waterline feeling of they don't want to have anything catastrophic happen and ultimately look bad and kind of almost fall off the pedestal. Mm-hmm. In a way of failure. Mm-hmm. So it's why this question is posed, and I think it could actually be, I struggle with it too, but from my lens it's more I look stupid, or I'm not. It comes from a place of deficiency and not enough. And that's why I asked you in part 1 if you felt like when you do something, when it's over, if you feel like it's a feeling of you didn't do enough, or you could have done more, or you didn't do it well enough.
I'm more of like, move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and that's definitely a 3 thing. So the failure piece, do you feel like you're trying to avoid that? Or, because I think fear and failure are different. The fear of failure is something, but I think fear itself is more anxiety, and failure is more about image. What happens if I say I'm going to do something and I don't deliver? If I say I am something and the veil is pulled back and I'm not that thing.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty, it's a hard...
It is.
It's a hard question.
Yeah, I almost didn't put it there, but...
And not because I'm not willing to be vulnerable in it, but it's just like, I don't know exactly.
And it could just be that you have had a lot of success.
Well, and I avoid failure, exactly. I avoid failure, right? And that's why I take things on, and it's like, I'm not going to delegate, because if I give too much away, things will crumble.
I remember you wrote a social media post, I don't know, it's probably 6 months ago now, and I loved it. It just so perfectly captured how you are to all of us. And you wrote about all the things that you were. Do you remember that post? You said, so Marni does tattoos, she does stick and poke, right? Tattoos. Yeah. You're a yoga teacher. You plan a huge community event, Elevate, every year. What else was on the list? You had other things.
I work for 2 pharmacies.
You work for 2 pharmacies.
I do social media marketing for businesses. I do Blist.
Oh, and you also do, you and Kevin do work in the social work
Oh
world.
yeah, I'm a social worker.
She's a social
Forget
worker.
about that.
But she listed off all of the things that she did, and like some people might just know you as the tattoo artist. Some people might just know you as the yoga teacher. Some people might just know you from, I don't know, social work. And just that this amazing array of things that you are and that you do. And I think what you were actually saying in your post was that you do a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and that it was tiresome.
I do a lot,
It can be.
I think I was being honest with like
Yeah.
from the outside.
Yeah.
That's that idea of success. Wow, look at what she's doing. She's
Yeah.
doing so much. But like, I put myself into that situation, and it's not always like a healthy situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to really. Oh, it comes back to failure too. Is to let one of those go.
Right.
Is failure, and because everything I'm doing, I love doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it because there's a purpose there. There's passion there.
Mm-hmm.
And to let any of them go is failing. But at the same time, I'm failing myself in a way because I'm exhausted, or I'm
Right.
not, being 100% present for my friends and my family,
Yeah.
which I definitely feel a lot of the time when I'm overwhelmed with all of those lists of things
Yeah.
that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I avoid failure like the plague, and so I don't. Maybe it is that I haven't experienced enough. I remember I went into a job interview, and up to that point, every job interview I applied for, I would get, right? And so I kind of had this little bit of like I'm so good.
Yeah. You need me.
Yeah. I've got my stuff together. And I went into this one and I absolutely bombed it. Absolutely bombed it. And it was devastating for me. And that shame kind of came in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there was nothing I could do to like remedy it either. It was so bad.
Yeah.
And I'll dwell on that. I also had like a yoga interview at Junction 9 back when I first started, and I was like so prepped and so ready, and like, and then I came into the situation. I had a quarter of the time that I thought I had to teach like a mock.
Oh, you did do like
a mock class.
Oh yeah.
And one of the owners was pregnant. And so I had none of these things. Like I had planned an hour-long class that was like a power flow.
Oh gee.
And I'm going, what? And I couldn't adapt quick enough. I was just like so frazzled, and I didn't get the job. And I still think about that sometimes. Like usually I'm good at just going, whatever, it's over. But those things, because it was failure. It was I failed in that moment, right? But the learning experiences that come out of that has been awesome.
And sometimes threes can have a failure, and threes are good at this. However, it doesn't really become something that's good for them. If they have a failure, they can quickly almost say, write a book on how to nail your yoga audition. Or they could say how to not bomb a job interview, right? And so they'll find a way to craft. That's why they're image crafters, right? They'll craft something that happened to them that looked terrible, but they'll come out looking like a shiny new penny, right?
100%. I'm laughing because it's so true.
Threes are quite good at that, and it kind of is in service to us. Like we might read the book and go, whoa, don't do those things. Like make sure you have some pregnancy poses thrown in there. But at the same time, it might not be good for the three themselves because they end up skipping over how that actually felt.
It's that deceit part.
Yeah, that's where it's a misrepresentation of the self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I might steal that one when I'm teaching about threes. So we talked about how threes can be chameleons, how they can, and especially the social three, the one that you thought maybe your dad was. They can show up and be whoever they need to be in the moment. Do you relate to the word shapeshift at all? 2s, 3s, and 4s are all shapeshifters, but 3s do it in a way that they can shapeshift to be what's needed as successful or efficient or just looking like they're winning in a room of people. Do you have that?
I like I said before, like I have that. I can do it. But it's exhausting for me.
Yeah, you said that when we were off the camera at the beginning. You said it's tiresome. I think so.
Okay.
But it's tiresome for
tiresome
you to be.
For me. Yeah, it feels very unauthentic. And I relate to, is it the 5? Where I have to go and like recharge like hard after
9.
that. that 9?
5s and 9s, but I can just see like going into 9 because 9s don't
Yeah.
do, they be.
And that's
Right?
where I go.
Yeah.
And so I have to recharge like hard if I have to do that. It is. And yeah, it's not comfortable for
Because
me.
it's a lot of work to
Yeah.
be all these things, right?
And I feel like I've done the work, you know, I've done a lot of the work. And so if I have to do that, it just feels like, oh man, do I have to? Do I really have to stoop to that place where like I'm not really being myself?
Yeah.
And that's I mean, I remember like when I was drinking very heavily, like after high school and in high school, I would wake up with just like the worst feeling of shame and guilt because I knew that I was shape-shifting and like, you know, being who everyone else wanted me to be like the fun person, the, you know, the pretty person, the boy, girl, like the hang out with the guys and shoot the shit kind of person, right? And I just wake up being like, oh, who am I? You know? And just that guilt. And I had so many of those experiences that it really just turned me off of like drinking and stuff too. Because it's just like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Maturity as well. But
Yeah, that helps. That's what keeps us alive. That's probably a good segue to talk about where the 3 goes in their security and in their when they're less resourceful.
Yeah.
So the way that I have been trained through B. Chestnut and Uranio Pius helped me to understand differently the way of the arrows. And so traditionally the way that I thought about it, and even some Enneagram books are written this way, that say, for example, the 3 goes to 6 in health, and the 3 goes to 9 when they're not doing well, when they're stressed out. And I've come to more of an understanding through my teachers that it's not quite like that. It doesn't quite work that way. And so the 9 for you would be where you would go when you've so every dominant number, every number has levels of health. Okay? And so we're all kind of, most of us that are kind of contributing to society are living right around the midline, slightly above. Something might happen, like COVID, for example, we might slip under the midline. But what happens is our personality, our ego, has an escape hatch on it. And before we actually fall into the basement of our number, which when we all get down there, we all look the same. We can all be suicidal, pathological, and it's hard to actually differentiate who and what we are. So before we kind of get to those basement levels, our number will have an escape hatch and it'll kind of send us in another direction. So for you, that would be 9. And that's where you would go with, I call it less conscious work, right? Maybe you're tired, maybe there's something that's been put upon you and you're just like, eh. Or you just go there actually quite comfortably. Like you said that a lot of people say, well, you're so chill, you're so relaxed, like you just seem like nothing gets you down. That's probably the 9 energy that you might be in with those people that observe that in you. So the 9 is more where you go when you're just not super conscious. You know, you can just kind of like loaf it on the couch, right? And one thing that I've read about 3s is that they might actually look like they're really efficient and productive and killing it on the outside, but behind closed doors, like they're pretty good at chilling. They're pretty good at just like Netflix and laying on the couch and sleeping until noon, because it is a lot of work, as you described, to be, you know, all those things that you are. So when they go to 9, they just kind of like, woo, they can just kind of slide down into 9. But to go to 6 isn't necessarily trying to get there to be better than what you are. It's not as if going to 9 is bad. It's not quite like that. But B. Chestnut calls the number that we go to insecurity. And the reason why it's called the security point is because we only feel comfortable going there when we have support. So you might only be able to access the energy of type 6, which is the loyalist, caring about the collective, less about me being kind of the one and more about the group. You might only be able to access that number with conscious work and in support, when you have support of those that kind of have your back, right? And it's called the childhood heart point, where something in the upbringing of the little 3, the misunderstanding is that energy was not okay. That something was formed in the mind of the 3 that, you know, you're better if you do well and succeed. When you get into the group, you kind of fade and blend, right? And it was understood for you to be more like
The leader.
You got to achieve and be and successful, right? And when you blend into the group, then that energy may not have been tolerated, or maybe there was someone else in your family of origin that was already representing that number really well, or that energy really well, and it just wasn't there for you to take on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes more conscious work for you to go to 6. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
And so for us to get to our the higher levels of all of our numbers, actually, we would have to go down to bring up 9 to its higher levels, rise it up above the midline. And so the high qualities of 9 are being, less doing, more being, really concerned, like 6s, about others, the collective. They're very intuitive and sensitive to the needs of others, and actually 9s are self-forgetting. So for the 3 to kind of forget themselves and get into the hearts of others, and to take that energy of 9 and to, I call it building a bridge, sort of over top of your 3. So from 9 over top of 3 to get to the energy of 6, where it's the loyalist and being more about the group, which I actually think you have a wonderful handle on. I think you are an evolved 3 in the way that you are about the group. You are about this town. Like you said, if you see a business that's struggling, you want to insert yourself there so that you can rise them up.
Yeah, that's why I struggled sometimes with like the, if I was a 1 to, or of a sexual, because sexual 3, because in this book it says that you're more about the collective and you want to raise people up and stuff, and so I got caught up in that because I do feel that, and I get like amped about like, and that's where I shapeshift, is where someone needs something from me and I will be it for them.
Right.
I will find a way to be that thing.
And so your instinct is self-preservation, right?
Yeah.
And the way that the instincts work is they're encoded in our DNA, and we all have them, and we can't think ourselves out of our instincts. They are what they are. It's like breathing, right? It's just like our bodily functions are our instincts. So the self-preservation one is you. So Marni is the counter type to the type 3, which, as we said earlier, it's why she was kind of like, what's my number? But the one, it's called your sequence. So the one that's in the first place for you is self-preservation. And then the one that's in the second place is actually the one that you can kind of just do with ease and grace.
Okay.
And that makes sense. Because if you can go into the sexual energy or the one-to-one energy, it's probably the one where it's like you don't get too tripped up there, you don't stay there too long and overdo it, and it's not repressed, right? So repressed for you would be the social one, right? The prestige one. So I'll go over the 3 different subtypes and give you an idea of why it was difficult for Marni to find her number, and it'll help bring that into focus a little bit more. So the self-preservation 3 gets the name of security. And I actually have a story that I want to tell about this after I describe it, because I think it just so talks about you. So this is the one, so the one that's the counter type is the one that goes against the passion of the type of vanity and deceit, right? So she would be working hard to push that down. And that's why we don't see that in you, right? We don't see the 3 that's kind of showing up, in the Rolls Royce and, the fancy everything. Yeah. But you would actually be image crafting to not look like that. Right. So the self-preservation 3 has the vanity for having no vanity.
Yeah. It's funny, I wrote here, I'm anti-vanity.
But it's still at work in you, right?
Yeah.
Because if you are trying to push it down, it's still something that is creeping up. Totally. And you're pushing it down and it comes back up, right?
It's funny because on that note is I feel like I get along better and have gotten along better with guys throughout my life, because that is like the vanity part is very like kind of suppressed in general. When I'm with my guy friends, it's like they don't really care about what they look like and stuff. Like
with girls, you don't have to compete,
and at least it's like the physical kind of. With the guys, I can just be like, I'm just me. Yeah. But with girls, it's just kind of like how do I fit into this? And it's just too hard. So I'm gonna go with the guys.
That's a good observation. That's good to know. Self-preservation 3s don't actively advertise their positive qualities. 3s are good at promoting, right? Especially the social 3 that, they might be running for elected office or something, and they've got their face on your lawn on a bored or something. So self-preservation threes don't actively kind of brag or let people know about their positive qualities.
And have a hard time accepting compliments.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Determined to be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
Does that feel true for you? Workaholic, we talked about that. Self-reliant and self-sufficient. I think that kind of goes back to that thing where delegating isn't your favorite thing. Like, if it needs to be done, you're going to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
My story is that I remember when you and Kevin went traveling the last time, and you guys were going to be gone for, I don't know, 6 months. And you came home after 3. And I remember talking to you afterwards, or you sent me a message or something and said, we're coming home. And I think I asked you why, and you said, I just miss home. I just miss my own things, my bed, routine. And that really
community
speaks into the self-preservation instinct, right? I think a person of the self-preservation instinct could probably only travel for so long without having like time to really put some roots down, right?
Yeah.
And to be uprooted again and again and again. Whereas you said Kevin he'd still be traveling.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we did travel for a whole year at one point in Asia and stuff like that, and I feel like I separated myself from like my work that I could just do that. But with the Europe trip that we went on, was supposed to be six months, I was still maintaining work from abroad, and so I was so deeply connected here to my work and my community that I was trying to help, that being there felt so wrong. I just couldn't. And I went into like a depression because and of that, and it was very, very hard for me to come home and admit that I failed, right? Because it's the shame. Like, I went into that depression because I thought I was failing, right? Like, to come home halfway through what I told people, like, that is failure to me, right?
And did you feel like you had to reinvent yourself into the new and improved?
It just felt
version of you?
I felt with like the work was just, I'm so grateful to have the community, like my off mat crew, and like just, you know, like you guys, is just to come home and be honest.
Yeah.
I just needed to come home.
Yeah.
And not have to make excuses. Oh, you know, like the weather sucked and it was really lonely because it was winter time, which was all true, but it's like, those are all excuses. I just wanted to go home.
And I think what happens, you know, our passion kind of works so hard to try to protect us, but when we actually relax it, it's where we're most seen.
Yeah.
And it's where the most connection happens, and it's where the most growth happens. And so, well done, because I just remember being glad you were home.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, Marni and Kevin are coming home, yay! The social 3 is the prestige one. That's the one that's the most obvious 3. I think I talked about the Oprah Winfrey kind of a 3. They embrace vanity. The subtype of Marni would deny vanity. Prestige embraces it. They're the most chameleon. They're the most worried about being exposed. They're the most worried about kind of having that veil pulled back, and it's like, oh, where's the real you? And then the sexual 3, the name of that subtype is masculinity or femininity, and they're kind of somewhere in between denying and embracing it. They're the ones that are really for others.
Yeah.
They try to promote other people, but they do it through, they want to kind of look good on the arm of somebody else as a significant other, or, you know, that really important person in the workplace or whatever. So they promote others, they please others, and they're very ambitious and hardworking, just like the other 3 types of 3s. We talked about some growth for 3s, and I think you've actually already exemplified this just in your actual lived life that we can see, and you've touched on it in this conversation with me, but vulnerability being a big piece for you, hey, of just kind of coming clean on what's really going on for you, as opposed to supporting other people and kind of keeping others uplifted, being instead of doing, and watching for how you might amp yourself up in the doing to avoid feeling things. And then one thing about going to 6 for the 3 is being able to face the fears, right? 6s are in the fear triad, and they're managing fear all the time, and they end up, you know, kind of making good work of doing it. They manage fear well. And threes can kind of take a page out of sixes books and just admitting that some fears are there and how I'm going to manage them when they come up. Kind of thinking of, not that you want to have worst case scenario thinking all the time, but maybe, you know, in case this doesn't work out, I might think about a backup plan that's not going to have me coming out looking better, but it's actually going to be something that's going to be good for everybody, including me.
Yeah.
And so just to wrap it up, Marni, what do you love about being three?
It's funny because when I found out about being a three, I was kind of like, ugh. But then the more I go into it and the more I'm honest and vulnerable with that number, I see like the beauty in it. I love that I live in the heart triad because I think a lot of the times we as threes look like we have kind of like this mask on, or we can, you know, shapeshift to be kind of like that person you want us to be, and so like heartless, like, you know, more just like upfront. I love that we live in the heart triad, because when like advice for other people in this is just like we do feel a lot, and I think that people don't necessarily see that up front. They see us as efficient and organized and like put all our stuff together, but we feel a lot.
Threes are the
I
most
feel
sensitive
a lot.
number. Yeah, they're the most sensitive.
Yeah, and I got a lot of heat for that, I think, as like a kid not knowing how to like deal with that, and feeling safe with just like putting on like a mask for that. But so I love that we live in the heart. That feels really good for me, and with yoga too, just like the work that goes in there. I love that as my like self-pres, well, and like my ability to move into like the sexual three is just, I feel like I do a lot for the community. Like that's where I give a lot of my energy, is for others, and that feels good. And that's part of like that three thing too, is like I want to be good, not just look like I'm doing good. I really want to be good. And so I love that. Yeah.
And then what about sort of the more shady side of three? What have been some challenges?
The workaholism one is definitely like a big one. That like gets me into trouble for sure. I've like physically like put my body through so much pain and stuff because of just like working and going too hard. And something that has been really valuable for me is learning more about like Ayurveda. And I'm a Pitta, so I'm fiery. So I've got fiery and three, like that's a lot.
It's a force to be reckoned with.
It's a force to be reckoned with. Like it's a lot. And so what I'm learning is with the Enneagram and Ayurveda, mixing them together too, is just recognizing how I can just like make little subtle changes to really suppress that fire just a little bit, so that it's not like forging a big forest fire. It can be dimmed to like a nice, you know, campfire. And that's like my workaholism, is I need to just find a good balance. And I struggle with that constantly. I'm quite open about that. Just like,
I would say you are too.
Very, And I mean, I think that as a three, we can be vulnerable. Like if we're doing the work and we're like, you know, and there's a lot to be learned in that, like that workaholism. That is not all that it's shaped up to be. Like it's not the end all be all. And so there's lessons I think that the threes can offer too, is, you know, this idea of success is maybe, you know, there's some dark sides to that for sure.
There's a downside to working so hard. Well, I wanted to end today by reading something that I came across this today, and so 2.5 years ago you approached me and said, hey, do you want to run a retreat together? So we did, and it was in the middle of January, and it was actually kind of I feel like it was a beginning for a lot of things. It was a beginning for, I think just like weeks after that, Kyle and I bought the yoga studio, and I don't know, it just seemed like a lot started to just be, there was a lot of that was a creative time, I think, for both of us.
Totally.
And so Marni and I were promoting our retreat, and I wrote a post, she wrote a post on me, and I wrote a post on her, trying to generate interest for the retreat that we were hosting. And I wrote this, and I just want to read it out loud because I think it describes, for me anyways, one thing that I really love about you is that I do think you are a vulnerable 3. And if you are to sit down with Marni, like, she's pretty open book. Like, you've shared a lot of things. And so I wrote this back in, it was 130 weeks ago. I don't know why Instagram does that. It's 130 weeks ago. When Marni approached me and we sat down to plan our Reclaim retreat, we felt it would be important to introduce one another to the yoga community, just in case you didn't happen to cross paths with one of us. Marni put down some really beautiful words about me earlier in the week, and now it's my honor and pleasure to do the same for her. So this still holds true for me about you, Marni.
Aww.
When you first meet Marni, you're instantly drawn to her eyes. You can't help but stare for just a little too long. There's a depth behind those eyes and a wisdom that far exceeds her years. Marni calls herself a minimalist. She and her new husband, Kevin, live in a tiny home on what might be the most sacred piece of land in and around Cochrane, overlooking the Jumping Pound Creek. She's conscious of her environmental footprint and mindful of what she consumes. Her lifestyle might be minimal, but her heart is of maximum proportion. So true. Marni's yoga classes are woven from her heart. Her words, her themes, her music, and her presence all weave a thread that originates from a place of tenderness. Her ability to hold that heart space for all of us is steeped in a life devoted to travel and endless curiosity. Marni does the work of diving deep to the bottom of the sea and brings up the treasures for all of us to see. Her eyes have seen many things, and her heart has felt much depth, and we are also fortunate to be the recipients of these gifts.
Aw, that's
I just feel
nice.
that's so true of like your 3-ness. Like you are this deep feeling person that just generates so much for all of us. So,
so
thank
nice.
you. We can't hug because it's COVID, but I am going to just deep bow to you, Marni. Namaste. Thank you for coming on.